In this video, we're going to talk about human communities and how they started and kind of why they chose the places that they started. Humans initially started off as hunter-gatherers, and with the rise of agriculture, there was an opportunity to have more permanent settlement. When we talk about communities, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about when humans chose a place to settle, first starting off as maybe a village, growing into a town, and then a city and then maybe a mega city. Okay, so uh, when we talk about communities, this is what we're referring to is a human settlement. Why did humans choose certain places to start these communities? Let's discuss some of the factors. So geography is a crucial part of the decision. Rivers have historically been very useful for human communities to be near for a variety of factors. One of the key factors is that rivers tend to lead to fertile soil for agriculture. So before rivers were kind of dammed up and flooding was more controlled, rivers would kind of overflow during the flood or the rainy season and take all the mineral rich soil that was on the riverbed and in the water and usually from runoff from mountains, because mountains rock has a lot of mineral kind of nutrient density. So the soil that are in rivers are just nutrient rich. So when they would flood, they would take all that nutrient value and put it into the surrounding areas. So the Nile River is an example of this. This is why the Egyptians kind of chose to put a lot of their cities along the Nile River because the soil surrounding the river was very fertile. Not only are rivers kind of linked to fertile soil, they're also obviously useful for trade and communication and transportation. So if you could just navigate down a river to kind of get from one place to another, it was oftentimes much easier to do that than go over land since the prevalence of roads and obviously railroad tracks, etc., was like not there yet. So the rivers acted as also just kind of a highway for ancient civilizations. Natural harbors can be a factor in the creation of trade hubs. So if you can have places where ships can dock easily and kind of load and unload goods, it's gonna make a certain location very valuable for trade. Not only trade, but you can have fishing industry. Harbors were just basically useful because ships were a vital source of transportation and still are. You can argue that shipping, the container ships, those huge container ships we see, they still transport a massive amount of goods around the world even today. And the harbors that were important even hundreds of years ago are still important today. Valleys are typically more abundant with fertile soil, um, just due to the nature of gravity. When it rains, water will kind of run down mountains and pick up minerals and other nutrients and then kind of deposit them in valleys. So valleys typically have fertile soil. You can look at the example close to home here in California. The Central Valley is surrounded by mountains, and the fertility of the soil in that valley is largely a function of all the runoff from precipitation in the mountains that kind of has found its way down into the valley. And it's typically been through rivers, similar to what we talked about with the Nile. Before all the kind of waterways were dammed up in the mountains, the Central Valley would flood, and the kind of mineral nutrient wealth from the riverbeds would come up and kind of be deposited in the valley. That doesn't happen so much anymore, but now we have other means of fertilizing soil. There are also communities that form due to strategic value for military and defense purposes. So if a place is in a pass in the mountains, for example, maybe the military is going to establish a base there. or the Strait of Gibraltar is another example, which kind of uh, opens up the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. So if you can block that, you can kind of control the ships that go into the Mediterranean Sea. So that's another example of a strategically important location. The weather is also a factor in not just where communities start, but the value and desirability of a particular community. So the San Francisco Bay Area uh, has some of the best weather in the world. And so no matter what happens with, the local politics, etc., it's still going to have this massive draw for people because the weather is considered some of the best in the world. Natural hazards are more related to places where you would not want to put a community. So it is a factor though in kind of the negative sense of where not to build something. And then just to note, isolated civilizations have historically lagged those that were well connected. So if your community was located on an island or deep in the mountains, that typically was not good for your long-term viability as a society and civilization. Those civilizations and societies that were connected with others not only benefited from trade, but also just the exchange of ideas and technology. So if you were able to access the ideas from other civilizations, you could then implement and integrate those into your own. And by that way, kind of keep up with the latest developments in human civilization around the world. There were some economic considerations too. So natural resources, so communities forming around the locations of natural resources. Um, you could say that a lot of Texas was kind of developed because of the oil that was found there, kind of in the earlier days of America. Um, and even now, there was the kind of resurgence of of fracking in that area. So a lot of communities in Oklahoma and North Texas sprung up kind of as boom towns because of the presence of that industry and those resources kind of being rediscovered, you could say. Another example is Johannesburg, South Africa. It was kind of developed around a lot of the gold mining that happened in the area. And then just being in the way of a trade route. So Istanbul, modern Istanbul in Turkey, which used to be Constantinople during kind of the Roman era. It sits in a very strategically important location for trade. It's kind of connects Africa, Europe, Asia, and it kind of sits in the middle of it. So Constantinople was a very important nexus, not just for trade, but for different civilizations meeting and exchanging ideas.